Osborne said, but actually, the next 3 to 5 years, well, these are empirical questions, you know, the next 3 to 5 years are going to show what happens. You know, and that it'll be very interesting, to say the least, to see whether Cuba continues in a socialist path, what changes they make, politically and otherwise, economically. You know, so, you know, we're all going to see what happens.
I just want one last point is that
somebody else has.
We're going to let Osborne talk.
We really
want to talk again.
Well, I'll just say this, that what happened in 1959, which was the second of that century revolution, socialist revolution, the first would be in 1917, what the workers and farmers established in Cuba in 1959, overturning the prerogatives of capital and private property. That's the bane of this society. They did that. People who were determined as well, the U.S. thought that could not happen. That was part of their arrogance and arrogance of these imperialist rulers that ruled this country. And that basis set the stage for a new form of democracy. That revolution, democracy of total participation of working people and farmers who create the wealth of society. That the benefit of that becomes, and that's the basis of the democratic and political institutions were set the stage with that revolution, and they continue to this point. In terms of the individuals you're talking about, and you look across the board of their leadership now. We went over the stats in terms of the transition that's been going since, well, basically I think since '94, the transition and the various titles that you look across the board, some of the stats that are already that transition has happened, and that can only happen with what the strength of the Cuban Revolution and the democracy someone outlined in terms of what happens amongst all the various organizations and participation in society down to 60. That's something that cannot happen in this bourgeois democracy. It is a bourgeois democracy, capitalist democracy we live in here. And Fidel Castro, along with some of the, I don't have all the names of it, but if you look at some of the names of some of the central leaders of July 26th, and then some of them are still in key positions, but there's a transition that's happening amongst that later. Obviously, they're mortals, so so we'll see. But I maintain that the basis of what's happening in human society is based on the grounds of the revolution, what was accomplished in '59, in the face of huge obstacles which they still face today, and it's going to be ratcheted up by whoever gets in the White House next January. Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama, John McCain, maybe someone else. That they're going to continue to tighten the ratchet against the revolution, primarily because of its example. You're talking about a country of 11 million people, a semi-colonial country. What they face was not only the economic, but the political and military gun at their throat for the last since 1959, and 61 when they declared the character of their revolution. It was the beginning stages of the revolution. The U.S. was indifferent on it. They weren't sure, but the leadership and character of the July 26th movement, led by Fidel Castro and among others, Raul happens to be his brother, and a few other names, Almeida, of course Che Guevara, Cienfuegos, others were killed by U.S. imperialism against those particular people. So, but I maintain it's a different kind of democracy, more participatory democracy by the mass of people. That's been the strength of the Cuban Revolution against all these odds.
If I could mention really quick, I don't want to interrupt you. I want everybody to get a chance to talk, but I just wanted to explain the system really quickly because I think that's probably the main confusion with these two gentlemen here. Is that they don't actually understand how the system works because no one's really explained it up here, and I feel that's a very big disservice to the audience. The Cuban system works like this. First, you begin on the neighborhood level. They have what they call committees for the defense of the revolution, and the CDRs organize people in neighborhood blocks. I mean, there's millions millions of them across the country. Well, maybe not millions, there's a couple million. But there's a lot. There's a hell of a lot. And they involve everybody on neighborhood levels in these committees. What these committees do, their purpose, is they act as a kind of a dual, like a community improvement program, but at the same time they also work on elections. When election season comes around, they get together and they say, okay, look, we're going to nominate people for various offices, say it's for the regional elections or maybe the city elections or the national elections for that matter, which is where we're concerned with. The national elections, people get nominated, and it gets, they run through the candidates. I mean, people will vote on the local level, and whoever has the most votes can be the candidate there. And then when it moves on to the higher stages, people will all, you vote on all these different nominated candidates. When it gets to the final national level, a lot of people don't think that Fidel is contested. In reality, he's actually a candidate from Santiago de Cuba. He's elected by the neighborhood committee, and then when the national election comes around, the voters basically, you have all the candidates lined up for the National Assembly, and you can vote yes or no. It's not like it's, Juan Jimenez versus Pablo Garcia. It's more like yes or no for Juan Jimenez or yes or no for Pablo Garcia. And the only way a candidate can actually get into office is with more than 50% of the vote. Fidel, for example, has had only about 91% of the vote from the 98%. That's still 400,000 people that say, fuck Fidel. That's 400,000 people. That's a lot of people, but they don't constitute a very big percentage of the population. They're not a majority. And even dissident groups in Cuba recognize that only about 5,000 or so people are actually actively involved in these anti-Castro groups. I mean, there are people in Cuba who hate Castro. They have open-air meetings. Not too long ago, maybe it was a year or so ago, the Cubans that were against Fidel in Havana said, okay, we'll have a national meeting in Havana. They had an attendance of about 500 people, and they had an event. They actually had a screening of a video that George Bush had recorded saying, I support your struggle for freedom in Cuba, et cetera, et cetera. This was open. The Cuban authorities did nothing to stop them. They didn't say, you can't do this. They didn't come up with clubs and beat them all to death like might happen in other countries in the world, like in Iran, for example. But they indeed had this anti-Castro meeting. And you can't claim that they don't have these. They have. I saw it on BBC. You can go on BBC, search it for yourself. You can see it. I'm not making it up. This is all things I've seen in Western media. And that's a very limited scope of what things actually are going on in Cuba. They use their own sources. But to say there's no democracy in Cuba, or to compare it to Iran, as, in your words, a disservice to the Cuban people and to socialism. I mean, because
I'm sorry, if you're gonna go at my comments, then I feel like I should be able to respond. And I think that you're missing the one point, which is that you're framing anybody who says anything against the Cuban model as coming from the right. And what you're missing is that there is leftist criticism. I don't support capitalism. I don't support the U.S. government's policies towards Cuba. I don't support any type of embargo against Cuba. I fully, I can value, and I think that it was a great moment in world history, what happened in the Cuban Revolution, 100%. I support that 100%. But it's every single time, you have to understand, there is a leftist criticism of Cuba. And so to frame every criticism that anybody makes about Cuba, about Fidel Castro, as, oh, you're propping up U.S. propaganda, you block yourselves into this U.S. versus Cuba debate. And that's what I'm saying is ridiculous. And you just gave us the model of democracy in Cuba. And the only thing I'm saying is that be critical of it and think of a more democratic system. No one's saying the U.S., that's probably much more democratic than what we have here in the United States. Absolutely. But is it utopia? Is it the greatest democracy that man and woman can create? I would venture no. And so let's be critical of it. And let's not close our minds to criticizing Cuba and its models from a leftist perspective. And don't shoot everybody down who criticizes it as coming from the right, as some right-wing conspiracy, as someone's trying to prop up imperialism.
I'm taking control, okay? And I want to just express my complete agreement with what you said.